Well, howdy everyone, my name's Chris and today I'm reviewing the Canon 70-200mm f2.8 USM L lens. This was first released all the way back in 1995, and since then Canon have released two newer image stabilized versions of this lens. But you can still get this older version for around £1,000 brand new. Now that's a huge amount of money for a lens without image stabilization, so is it worth it? Let's find out. Firstly, this lens is very big and heavy, weighing about 1.3 kilograms. It's made of metal, so you won't have to worry about anything other than your floorboards if you dropped it, but still, don't drop it. The lens has full-time manual focusing, so you can turn the focus ring anytime, and the focusing is well damped, smooth and precise. The USM autofocus motor is very fast and virtually silent. The front element doesn't rotate during focusing, which is good news if you like to use polarizing filters. The zoom ring is also extremely smooth to use. The lens is built very tightly, but it's not advertised as being weather sealed, so you should avoid taking it out in the rain. But all in all, the lens is built to the highest standard, and it's a pleasure to use. My favourite advantage of having an f2.8 lens is that the wide aperture means you can throw the background out of focus even more. A typical telephoto lens will have a maximum aperture of f5.6 when zoomed in, which looks like this. As you can see, the background is quite nice and blurry. However, if you have a lens like the Canon 70-200mm f2.8, you can open the aperture 4 times wider, down to f4 and finally down to f2.8, which looks like this. As you can see, the background is much blurrier. Now, it's up to you whether or not this is enough of a difference to justify spending a lot more money on an expensive lens like this. But remember, if you're really desperate for a blurry background, another option is to get a fast 50mm lens, like the Canon 50mm f1.8 or f1.4. They cost a lot less money, and a lens like that will throw your background out of focus about as much, and would be a lot more practical. The f2.8 aperture also lets in a lot of light. It lets in 4 times the amount of light as a normal, cheaper telephoto lens at f5.6. which is why people use this lens indoors for wedding photography and so on. I set the lens to f2.8 to get this video footage late at night. I didn't have to use crazy ISO levels to get a usable picture. But you can see how shaky things are without image stabilization. However, in this shot, I'm using a tripod, so things look a lot smoother. You can probably see that the bright lights are causing the lens to have quite some serious problems with lens flare. I'll talk more about that later. Let's look at the picture quality. How does this older, non-image stabilized lens stack up when it's used on a modern digital camera? On my APS-C camera, which is an 18 megapixel Canon 60D, which is quite a common image sensor for Canon cameras today, it's pretty sharp. But newer lenses do perform a little better. Let's look at the performance at 70mm first. Wide open at f2.8, the lens is sharp, but there's a slight lack of contrast and the picture has a noticeable purple haze, which you can particularly see here on the edges of the windows. The corners do retain image quality, but you can see chromatic aberrations on contrasting edges. So the picture quality is very good, but there are a couple of problems in the way. However, stop the lens down to f4 or f5.6 and these problems largely disappear, although a little chromatic aberration still remains in the corners. Now let's take a look at things zoomed into 200mm. Wide open at f2.8, the picture quality has improved, with even better sharpness and contrast. The slight purple haziness remains, but it's much harder to see. The corners are slightly soft, but image quality is holding up well, and there's much less chromatic aberration than at 70mm. And things only improve as we stop down to f4, and then f5.6. All in all, it's a sharp lens, but a couple of image quality issues betray its aging optics. There are a couple of specific image quality problems that I'd like to show you though. Fast telephoto lenses, like this Canon 70-200 f2.8, tend to have problems working against bright light, and this lens is no exception. When the sun or another bright light source is in the picture or close by, the lens loses a lot of contrast. This surprised me at first because my smaller 70-200mm f4 lens, which I reviewed a few months ago, never had this issue. But unfortunately this is pretty normal for the bigger f2.8 lenses in this class because they have much larger glass elements. You can see the lack of contrast in these pictures because the sun was close by in these shots. Here's some video footage to demonstrate there's a serious lack of contrast. You can help this a little by using a lens hood, as I'm showing you here, but even then, the problem still hangs around. Another issue is that the macro performance of this lens is not good. The lens can only focus down to about 1.5 meters, so this is as close to my houseplant as I could get. It's still close enough for headshots and portraits, but you won't be able to get too close to flowers or anything really small. However, in that shot you can see the good quality of the lens's bokeh. The out of focus areas are always very smoothly rendered with this lens, even in places where the background is quite busy, so the bokeh is very nice indeed. So apart from the serious problems with lens flare against bright lights, this lens is great. But is it still worth £1,000 in 2013? I don't think so. Lens technology has improved a lot in the past 20 years, and you can get a fast telephoto lens with image stabilization for the same price nowadays, or even less. Canon charge way too much money for their lenses, which is pretty frustrating. But it's still a fantastic piece of kit, and if you can get hold of one for a good price, this lens will do what you need. Just make sure you get that lens hood.